Hi, folks. You're with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel. Thank you for joining us. In this live chat, I'd like to talk about the failure of the US and Western forces in Afghanistan. They're there for 20 years, spending billions upon billions, indeed trillions of dollars, bribing, cajoling. There's wall-to-wall endless propaganda. There's affirmative action schemes. There's promotion of women. There's lesbian gender studies. There's gay pride flags. They absolutely hammered the Afghans with every piece of Western globalist wokeism that they've got at their disposal. And the minute that the Americans and the Western forces are getting back on the airplanes and there's no point of a gun and there's no big bucks to throw around, the minute that they go, the entire country goes back to the Taliban. Now, more than half the Afghan population know nothing but American occupation. All they know is lesbian gender studies, affirmative action programs, being told that men are bad and women are good, and all these sorts of things. Homosexuality promotion, lesbianism, gay pride, the whole lot. They've got both barrels of the woke agenda, and yet they rejected it completely. So let's look at that, and let's look at why. Firstly, the Afghanis have completely rejected Western wokeism and globalization nonsense, but the globalists have been, comparatively at least, relatively at least, much more successful in the West. So let's look at why the West failed in Afghanistan, but why in the Western nations, the Western white nations, this globalist wokeism has gone. They've done rather well with it in terms of their objectives. At least is very destructive, huge amount of collateral damage. But the West has to some extent accepted the forced wokeism. Now, I think given the choice, Western people, if Donald Trump comes along or a non-woke candidate, they'll vote for them. But as long as the globalist elites can, prevent any non-woke candidates from standing, or if a woke non-woke candidate does stand, to make sure that the election is rigged accordingly, then as long as they can do that and get away with it, and for the moment at least they seem to be, then they can continue to push wokeism, and at least they'll have enough control of media and the deep state, the public service, the courts, and all that sort of thing to impose that. But they had all that control in Afghanistan, and yet with all those tools at their disposal for 20 years and throwing more money at the Afghanis than they'd ever seen in probably the last 500 years, they were unable to change any minds or significantly any minds. And some are saying, well, look at all the people that want to leave Afghanistan to go to the West. If those people really thought that the West had the answers, then they'd have fought the Taliban. And there weren't that many Taliban fighters, nor are they that well organized, so they could have been beaten without that much trouble. But yet not a single, barely a single US or Western trained Afghan soldier wanted to fight the Taliban. They thought they had more in common with the Taliban than they did with the West. And as long as the West is giving away a lot of free stuff, sure, people will sort of put up with them and maybe a little bemused, and they'll sort of chuckle to themselves about gay pride flags everywhere you look. But the reality is that the Americans were throwing a lot of money at people doing that and trying to shoot and kill the Taliban. So, but without that, there was no real support, no real interest in these Western societal solutions, if you'll call them, or way of doing business. So anyway, just looking at this, the Afghanistan and all the countries really in those regions, they're very tribal, very family based, and there isn't the trust, the social trust in the various tribes and the various families, various villages. There's no commercial trust in the country, and there's certainly no trust in government. There is trust in Sharia law and the Quran, all that sort of stuff. There is trust there, which is why that tends to be where people gravitate towards in those regions. But other than that, there's no trust, certainly not as we would understand it in the West. Now, given the Afghanis completely rejected, soundly, resoundingly rejected Western woke globalism, and well done to them for doing that, the globalists have nonetheless been far more successful pushing the woke agendas in the West than they have been anywhere else. Now, did they achieve this because everyone thought it was a fantastic idea? Does people think transgender bathrooms are such a wonderful idea, or that gay pride flags, or lesbian studies, or these sorts of things? Does anybody really think they're of value or benefit or of use to the wider society? Of course not. Of course not. A tiny bunch of people like it in terms of the capacity to disrupt, and these are angry, bitter, vengeful Marxist lesbians, those sort of people. They're behind it and they support it. But we're talking a tiny fraction of the population really support these things or agree with them. There are those who go along with it. Those who think, oh well, why not? As long as I'm getting something out of it. But really, there's hardly any support in it. So how were they nonetheless able to go as far as they have? For example, school teachers, the amount of left-wing school teachers and college academics, people in the public service generally, people in the body politic, and so on, and the population at large. The West was generally a very high trust society, or the societies in the West are quite high trust, certainly by comparison. And when I was meeting people who were coming out of the Eastern Bloc, the former Soviet Eastern Bloc, so I'm talking of Poland and Romania and Czech Republic, all those sort of places, after the Soviet Empire had fallen over, I was staggered at how little trust these people had. That Eastern Bloc and the Soviet Bloc generally, people had very little trust in one another, very little trust in anyone they hadn't known for a long time, no trust at all in government and government institutions and so on. And yet it was meant to be a socialist paradise that was supposed to be looking after the welfare of the people and to have equal outcomes and so on. But the trying to achieve equal outcomes was just so heavy-handed and so brutal and so ideological that it ended up having the reverse effect. Nobody trusted anybody anymore. So the West, by comparison, had very high trust in institutions and relatively, and in government, trust in the media and so on and so forth. Now, this trust wasn't absolute. It's just higher than it was anywhere else. So if you're going to impose globalization and societal re-engineering, which is what the globalists are wanting to do and are doing and have done, then you need society that has a lot of trust in the institutions, and you then can use that trust. You can deceive people under the cover of that trust that they have. So when a person in authority, an academic, a professor of this or that says, well, really, we do need transgender bathrooms, or someone said, well, we really do need gay pride flags, and the politicians say, well, we've got to go along, and these are the experts, and we think so too. We believe in equality, and all these sorts of things. And a lot of it's very, very Marxist. But they nonetheless can use that trust that the people have in the institutions to creep under the sheets and do what they're going to do to the constitutions, the rule of law, due legal process, all these sorts of things. And it is that trust, that Western trust in our institutions, that they used to impose globalization and the woke globalist agenda upon us all. Nobody wants to be called a racist in a fair society. And it's because we're so fair, because we're so trusting, and because there is so much social trust that they're able to get away with it. And they're using up that trust. And very soon there won't be much left. Already you can see the divisions in society, the destabilization. Women don't trust men, men don't trust women. One race doesn't trust another. The races come at the mass migration coming in, the multiculturalism. So you live exactly as you did in the country you've come from, which is a third world shithole. So these people are coming in and they're not trusting everyone else. They're not even trusting people from nearby countries. So there's the amount of social trust, commercial trust, business trust, trust in government, trust in institutions, trust in media is at an all-time low. I've never seen it this bad. Never seen it this bad, and it's declining at a rate of knots, and it's probably got further to go. So to the point where we're going to become the very countries that, such as Afghanistan and places like that, we're going to become that here, where there is no trust outside of the immediate family or the immediate tribe. And that's surely a very undesirable thing. But one suspects is what the globalists want, and they're doing this on purpose to destabilise society, and they're using the gay lesbian this and the pride flag that and the transgender bathrooms and the all this transgender people in sports. They're using all that just to destabilise society. So always the majority of the sensible, reasonable people, the ones who did trust the institutions, they're always having to give a little ground here, but it's constant. Give a little ground today, some more ground tomorrow, some more ground after that, until eventually they're pushed off the stage. They've got no place at the table anymore, and that seems to be what's happening. But the issue was, without that high trust that was initially the case, trust was built up over generations, hundreds of years. Without that high trust, they never could have pulled it off to the extent that they have, and that, I think, is a tragedy. You've been with Tacitus today, and thank you for listening.